Folks, it's Good Friday. We place a black cloth on the cross and a crown of thorns. I will be telling the Good Friday story through the eyes of Mary Magdalene, a faithful follower of Jesus. The Gospel of John had her standing near the cross. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke had her standing at a distance. Today, let us join Mary Magdalene near the cross and enter into the story. All once I heard, Mary Magdalene, come quickly, they have arrested Jesus. And the soldiers had taken him to the high priest. I got this word late on Thursday evening that the soldiers had taken Jesus. My worst nightmare. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, had betrayed Jesus. My heart is beating so fast. How can I help him? He has meant so much to me. My family had always wanted me to marry and have children. In fact, they had someone picked out for me. But I knew that was not going to be my life. So when the opportunity presented itself one day, Jesus showed up in Magdala with his disciples. And he tore out 7 demons from me. I was later baptized. But I was free. And I just wanted to follow this extraordinary teacher, this extraordinary person. I know it was courageous of me to leave my family and home behind, but I wanted to be with Jesus. There were times when there was differences between myself and the disciples. I know Peter and I really went at each other a few times, and I believe it's because we both wanted to serve and love Jesus so much. But right now, we're in Jerusalem during Passover, and what a mess. Many folks are there for the festival of the Passover, an event that secures the liberation of the people of Israel from Egyptians. In fact, you might even call it a powder keg. Many folks seem to be involved during Jesus' arrest. Herod Antipas was the ruler at the time, fearful of anyone who might challenge his authority. Pontius Pilate was appointed governor of Judea under the Roman Empire. His main responsibility was to keep order, no uprisings or rebellions. So he happened to be in Jerusalem during the Passover, making sure he could keep the peace. Caiaphas, the high priest of the temple, was rattled by the teachings and activities. He remembered how Jesus had gone into the temple and caused the money changers to see the tables go flying. He did not want any part of this Jesus. Then the Sanhedrin, the senior council of Jewish elders, part of the religious power. I also heard that Peter had denied Jesus and that all the disciples had deserted him. He's now alone. He's now alone. I arrived at what they would call the general's military tent. And there were so many people outside. So many people had come. Because this was the place where Pontius Pilate would conduct his trials. Here in Jerusalem. I was hearing accusations of blasphemy was being brought against Jesus. I am sure that this is coming from Caiaphas. Because Caiaphas needed to find a way to get Jesus out of here, to get Jesus away from his authority, to get Jesus away from teaching other things that he didn't want to hear. Teaching love, teaching humility, teaching how to love your neighbors. Teachings that were different than what Caiaphas wanted to hear. So Caiaphas wanted him dead. All at once Jesus appears, and Pilate is standing right beside him. Oh my, what a sight. Jesus is bloody, so beaten I could barely recognize him. Shackles on his wrists. His garments were covered with streaks of blood from the use of a whip. Pilate addressing the crowd, keeping with tradition on Passover. I release to you a prisoner. Your choice. Here I have Barabbas, who is a murderer. Here I have Jesus, who you call the King of the Jews. I am thinking as my heart is beating so fast, there is hope. You know, I pray, leave Jesus go. Not today, as the crowd had started shouting, they wanted Barabbas. Barabbas, we want Barabbas. And Barabbas just started ringing and ringing and ringing in my ears. But I sensed that Pilate knew that Jesus was an innocent man. So he addressed the crowd and asked them, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do with Jesus now that they had freed Barabbas? I find no fault. Pilate even said that. I find no fault with Jesus. But all at once they shouted, crucify him, and it got louder and louder. Crucify him, crucify him. I'm thinking, how can you shout that? This man is the Son of God. And that was the blasphemy, because Jesus truthfully claimed that he was the Son of God. I was praying that Pilate would send his soldiers out to quiet this mob and set Jesus free. Jesus was the truth. Why can't people understand that? Why are they so afraid of him? Then things got interesting, as Pilate did a peculiar thing, asked his servants to bring him a basin of water to wash his hands. And he did this so that everybody would see him. I am innocent of this man's blood. So my personal thoughts were, so Pilate thinks this absolves him of bringing death upon an innocent man? What a terrible injustice. Pilate condemned Jesus to death by crucifixion, the most horrible imagined. I watched with tears in my eyes, not believing in what I heard or what I was seeing as Jesus was brought into the courtyard in a purple cloth. A crown of thorns digging deep into his head with streams of blood just coming down over his cheeks. I prayed as I could not believe what I was witnessing. Where are the disciples? Why are they not with him? I kept hearing the crowd mocking him. Save yourself as you have saved others. Prove that you are the Messiah. But I knew he was the Messiah. I stood shaking as the soldiers dragged a wooden cross across the yard. All I kept thinking was more torture. More torture. My eyes were so fixed on Jesus as they removed his cloak. All eyes on him as they waited and watched him pick up that cross. I looked into his face and noticed he closed his eyes. And I thought he must be praying for strength. Praying for help from God. And I know God hears him. His eyes, he opens them. And he reaches out for the cross, knowing he must go and make this journey. I believe in my heart that God will save him. I'm afraid that more suffering and humiliation are just waiting for him to endure. The walk to Calvary begins by the Via Dolorosa. He's bloody, he's barefoot, and he starts the journey with soldiers and a centurion on horseback pushing back the crowds as they clamor to watch. I am having trouble myself seeing him. He falls down. The cross is so heavy and his body so beaten. My faith is shaking. Why, God? I can't understand. Let there be a time of glory as I pray harder. Jesus manages to get back up on his feet and continues. People are just pushing and shoving. Then along the way, he meets his mother Mary. This is under the worst possible circumstances. But her loving presence must have touched his heart. And he nearly falls again as he braces himself against the wall. And the centurion calls out to a man in the crowd who had just entered through the gates, a dark-skinned man. I heard the centurion call out to him, "Simon, help us here." Simon was displeased because now his life was being disrupted. He had two of his sons with him. "You must help carry the cross to the place of execution." Simon sees this terrible suffering happen to Jesus, and his heart opens. I could just tell something had changed in Simon. He was willing to help this stranger, and he reaches down, and he helps take up the cross. And I can hear him mutter, "I must help you." Jesus is mocked and spat all along the path. And then I notice how a lady wipes his face. And someone told me later her name was Veron. Jesus notices the women also along the way, women who were crying. I'm just trying to catch up to him as he falls for the third time. He sees me and he stands up, but the soldiers surround him, goading him onward to Calvary, which is now in view. Humiliation gets worse as he's stripped of his outer garments, standing there naked before the crowd, as the same is done to the other two criminals standing nearby. Soldiers divide his clothing between them as they throw the dice. One of the soldiers passes a cup mixture with some myrrh to dull the pain, but he refuses. The cross is thrown on the ground, his body placed on top, with his arms outstretched as a Roman soldier picks up a mallet and just hammers into his wrists. I can just hear that thud as I watch the blood spurt. How awful. This pain must be excruciating. His feet nailed to the center beam, bones being shattered, blood dripping down, with a sign above his head, "King of the Jews." I cannot bear to watch. I close my eyes and I praise to God for mercy. Why haven't you intervened to save him? Why, God? Then I hear Jesus' voice, sharp and clear over the crowd. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." He begs forgiveness for those who are torturing him. And then I remember his teachings, and I also need to forgive. He's just hanging there on the cross, in torment, awaiting death, a horrible, horrible death in anguish. And then in an unbelievable moment, I hear the one criminal say to Jesus, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said unto him, "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Other words I heard as I saw him look down at his mother and his beloved disciple. And he says, "Woman, here is your son," pointing to John. "Here is your mother," as he points to John, his beloved disciple. More disturbing words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then he cries out, "I am thirsty." It is finished. What did he mean, it is finished? Must be his mission, what God had called him to do, to fulfill the scriptures. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." After these words, Jesus bowed his head and breathed that last breath. Darkness sets in. The earth quakes and the rocks are split. For a moment, I thought the world was coming to an end. And I heard another voice, the centurion, down on his knees, saying, "Why this man? Truly this man was the Son of God. Jesus was taken down from the cross. Myself and other women wanted to make sure Jesus got a proper burial. Salome told me that a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph had gone to ask Pilate for Jesus' body. It was just before sundown, so the bodies needed to be removed. They had pierced Jesus' side to make sure he was dead, as blood and water flowed out. They had broken the legs of the other two criminals to make sure they were dead. And then Joseph of Arimathea appeared. He appeared winded as he climbed up the hill. He had gotten permission from Pilate. It was not long that Nicodemus also appeared to help Joseph. Not much time, he said. We must get him buried before the sun goes down. The sight of his mother Mary, who had rushed over and is there holding her son, cradle him in his arms. This lifeless body. What an image I will never forget. She kisses him and allows Joseph to take him from her. Joseph wraps him, and Nicodemus anoints him with oil he had brought along. I go and look for some flowers nearby. I'm just staring in disbelief. My God was dead. My Lord was taken from me. Joseph had a tomb near Calvary. It was new. No one had been laid in it. Joseph and Nicodemus carry his body wrapped in a shroud. I follow along behind with other Galilean women who had also remained. They learned that the veil in the temple had split at the time of his death. He is gone. Just horrible. Now what? What will my life be like? I had followed this man, his comfort, his healings. I waited and watched Joseph and Nicodemus emerge from the tomb. Beside, it was a large and heavy boulder. With some effort, they managed to roll it across the entranceway. It was now evening and difficult to see. I made sure that I took careful note as to where the temple was located, so I might be able to find it again. Folks, thanks for listening. And I would like to conclude with the words of this hymn. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they nailed him to the cross? Were you there when they nailed him to the cross? Oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they nailed him to the cross? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Sometimes it causes me to tremble, tremble, tremble. Were you there when they laid him in the tomb? Take a moment on Good Friday. Take a moment in silence and find Jesus Christ in your heart and understand the kind of love that he has for each of us as our sins have been forgiven. Amen.